Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be moving on to a slightly different topic than what I've been hitting on in the last month or so, and we're going to be taking a look at each individual aircraft kind of individually, showing off some neat little features of it and just kind of how to handle it, critical speeds and stuff like that. The place I thought I'd like to start with this one is with this neat little aircraft. This is a Zlin Ultra. This is a very neat, basically derivative of the Piper Cub. One of the things I really appreciate about this particular version is instead of having to sit in the back seat in order to balance it on your own, you actually can sit in the front seat. We're sitting here currently at Heckler Field. This is in Coventry, Connecticut. This is, as you can tell, it is a grass field, and it is in the real world, I kid you not, smaller than this. So I'm actually kind of impressed. Now, one of the great things about these types of aircraft is that they're so easy to operate in these kinds of conditions. And today, after taking off, we're actually going to be doing a little old-fashioned pilotage, which is basically going to be navigating. Along the way, I'll make a couple kind of little tips on the actual aircraft itself. And other than that, let's go ahead and get going. And hopefully this is a pretty good series. So first things first, for those of you who did track down the POH to this aircraft, you probably know a little bit about the features on here and how some of it is simulated, some of it is not. One of the first ones I want to point out to you, for those of you who haven't seen this before, is where the fuel gauge is located. It is actually sitting right up here, a little distorted because of the way the shadows hit it. And you actually have one fuel gauge per wing. Now, in the real aircraft, you actually have a little handle back here, which we can't use, unfortunately, that will control whether or not we get fuel from here. The good news is we don't have to worry about that too much. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's see what else we've got here. We have ourselves a regular throttle. We do not have a constant speed propeller on here, nor do we have a mixture control at all. This aircraft is basically for VFR bush flying only. In the real world, of course, we'd probably have our tablet or something sitting on our left leg so that we could see where we are. But for us, we're going to have to navigate the old-fashioned way today. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. It's a pretty straightforward experience. This is a Rotex 912 engine, which is basically a little tiny, very, very high revving engine that is super popular in kit planes like this. So first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to swing over on this right. We're going to switch the battery master to the on position. Now, when you do this, you basically provide power to all the different components. I'm going to make sure my avionics are switched off. You never want to have avionics on when you start an aircraft. You're going to damage the darn things. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this handle called choke. Yes, there is a choke on this aircraft. That blows my mind just a teeny tiny bit. We're going to pull it all the way out. And we're also going to double check to make sure that the throttle control is set all the way back. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my brakes are set very, very aggressively. We don't want to have this thing take off from us when we do get this thing started. We'll take off later. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to swing down to where it says strobe. We're going to click that switch. And then you have the two magneto switches located right here. I'm going to set the left one, set the right one, and now we're basically ready to start this thing. So let's go ahead and take a quick look around, make sure we're not going to suck in a squirrel or anything like that. I see nobody who's going to get offended. And then all we really have to do is crank it until it starts. That's it. That's actually really simple when you think about it. Again, I'm holding that brakes down because I don't want this thing ripping away on me too quickly here. Next thing you know, we can go ahead and fire up the avionics, and now we're good to go. So this aircraft, because it is a bush plane and because it is a STOL plane, we don't need a lot of room. We only need about 100 meters to get airborne on us. But there are some little tricks with this because of the fact that we're operating a tail dragger as opposed to some of the different types of aircraft. And I'm actually looking at my RPM getting a little low. I'm going to give it just enough throttle to keep us inside the yellow. Looks good. Don't forget to disengage the choke. It is not a very polite thing to be doing to an engine. It's in the name. So what we're going to do is we're going to have to determine what types of flaps we're going to use for takeoff today. So normally what you can do is you can just do a straightforward takeoff, give it full power, pull back, and go. But if we wanted to actually shorten our takeoff, we could go ahead and use two notches of flaps. So look out the window. 1, 2. Now this is going to give us the minimum takeoff distance. It's actually going to get us a rotation speed of 66 kilometers per hour, which if you take a look at our little line here, that's literally as soon as you hit the white arc, you're basically ready to get airborne. The problem is, and this is one of those real world versus simulator kind of problems, is the fact that if we do that on our climb out, we're actually going to have so much extra drag that we're going to be traveling so slow, we're actually going to be running the risk of overheating our little engine up in the front. Remember, this is an air-cooled engine, so you have to be very, very cautious with it. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to take off with those two notches of flaps. Once we get clear of the trees, again, our best speed for doing climbing with that kind of a situation is going to be right around 110 kilometers per hour or so. That's going to get us climbing very, very smoothly. Then we're going to go ahead and pop everything up. But again, because we only need that first stage of flaps to climb aggressively, we're going to have to pop out of the second stage once we get to a safe altitude, or like I said, we will overheat. So let's go ahead and leave those flaps in. We're going to get clear of the obstacles. Again, like I said, we're going to be cruising Again, I'm taking a look at the actual POH at the same time as I'm getting this aircraft ready. Pretty good. All right, so we're going to give it full power, release the brakes, and once we hit 44 miles per hour or 71 knots, we'll go ahead and 71 kilometers per hour, we'll go ahead and give everything a tug and get rolling. Again, it does not take that much distance to get this thing airborne. You want to keep that nose up gently. You don't want it to get too much. There's 66 knots, and we're airborne. As soon as we do that, again, like I was saying a moment ago, we want to kind of nose over just a little bit. Bring up that first notch of flaps because we actually climb safer. Now we want to get our speed to about 110 kilometers per hour, and that's going to go ahead and get us our quickest rate of climb. And you can see we're just about hit that now. Bring up that other notch of flaps, pull up just a teeny tiny bit. And that is literally all there is to getting this aircraft up in the air. That is a tremendously quick climb, and I can actually look at the golf course right over here on my left. Hello, Mr. Golf Course. Oh, nobody's playing today. What a shame. All right, I'm sure they really appreciated the fact I just took this airplane to the air directly above their heads. Now, taking a look at the POH over here as well, my best rate of climb is going to get me 112 kilometers per hour. So I actually can pull the nose of this even steeper. Notice we have no attitude indicator on this aircraft. That's going to be right about there. But the problem is, if you look out the window, we're basically standing on our nose here, so we have to kind of be very, very careful with this. So what I think is going to be a little bit safer is to actually let the nose come down a little bit so that it's a little bit easier to travel. Okay, so now it's time to actually do our flying. So what are your cruise settings in an aircraft like this? Well, if you take a look right now, I am so far into the yellow region, I could potentially damage this aircraft. It does not take much. Now, the other really scary thing is that we have very little control over the thermal properties of this engine. Basically, you can only cool it by providing it with enough airspeed. So you're always going to have a neat little balance between the two. Personally, I like to climb right around 4,000, or I should say cruise right around 4,000 RPM. It seems to work pretty well for this particular aircraft. Okay, so where are we going today? Well, we're going over to Hartford, so we're actually going to be using good old-fashioned pilotage in order to do so. So how do we do that? Well, we need to pick a very, very logical object and basically follow it until we get to our destination. I'm sure everybody's heard the expression IFR really means I follow rivers. No surprise here either. Now, one interesting thing is this aircraft trims pretty smoothly. Because we're such a short aircraft, the trim is going to be extremely sensitive. So we want to be very, very cautious about that. Another thing I want to throw out too is even though our engine's at a good RPM, note that our airspeed is still well within the danger zone. You would not want to do any quick movements with the controls when you're moving at these kinds of speeds. You could really, really damage the aircraft in the real world. So anyway, let's go ahead and find what we are looking for here. And that, I believe, is exactly what we've come to find. Just taking a quick look there. That looks like the highway. I didn't mean to do third person, but that's perfectly fine. I meant to do this. Yep, that's what we came here looking for. There is one of the major interstates here in Connecticut. Go ahead and swing nice and gently there. Pull the nose up just a teeny tiny bit. I don't need to be descending. Again, aircraft like this tend to be extremely sensitive because they are so small. Very low polar moment of inertia. And there we go. Bring the nose up just a teeny tiny bit more. The trim on this particular one is very slow, so you have to really be patient. Now, one thing I have learned about this version of Flight Simulator is that if you really, really hold down on the trim button for any real length of time, it tends to cause it to suddenly spike on you. So it's almost easier to tap the trim button as opposed to just jam on it, unless you need like an emergency trim or something like that. And now you can see, now that we have the aircraft fairly well trimmed out, we're flying relatively nose high, but we are at least in a much, much safer speed than they were a minute ago. Take a look out the window real quickly so we can actually see where we're going. All right, it looks pretty good. Now, one thing in the United States is there's very specific rules as far as what altitudes you have to travel at. Since we are using pilotage here, which again is just basically looking out the window to find our way, we are limited to be at least basically 800 feet over anywhere there's population, 500 feet over where there's no population. Looking out the window, it's clearly obvious to me there's literally population everywhere. So this is a situation where we want to be doing at least, like I said, 800 feet above everybody's heads right now. Fortunately, the local altitude isn't really much past 200, so I've got about 1,000 feet on everybody's heads now. All right, let's go ahead and run it through some paces real quickly. One interesting thing that I really appreciate about aircraft like this is because they are so light, in the event that you did accidentally stall the airplane, it's actually very, very easy to recover. It would simply be a matter of applying full power to it and coming in. But where the real challenge of this aircraft actually is going to be to safely land it in just a moment.
Runway 20. Altimeter 29.9 with 285 at 10.
All right, let's swing ourselves a little bit to the right here.
Fly left base runway 20 red 64.
We just got our approval to land. Yeah, nice. Yeah, this thing grooves itself pretty well. It doesn't have a really strong tendency to pull one way or the other. A little easier. All right, looks pretty good. Again, just a matter of giving those last taps in order to get this thing cruising. Now, one of the cool things about this aircraft is even though I'm doing about 150 kilometers an hour, you can tell that this aircraft has very, very little difficulty kind of grooving itself out at a specific altitude. Yeah, I'm not finding that it's bouncing too much one way or the other. Landing this thing is going to be an interesting experience. Our approach speed on this aircraft, if you go ahead and use full flaps, is going to be 85 kilometers an hour, which is pretty darn slow. If you actually want to do a short field approach, you can bring that 85 kilometers an hour all the way down to 80 kilometers an hour. Of course, if you do that, then when you land, you're going to be doing a 3-point as opposed to a 2-point landing. But we'll take a look at that when we get a little closer. Hey, it's the mall. I know exactly where I am. Now, the interesting thing is, if I were driving my car, I could actually be going about as fast as we are now. Obviously, we shouldn't be going that fast. I'm just saying we could be going that fast. It's just interesting when you look at it from that perspective. And that's going to be the mall on my right-hand side in just a moment. Take a look. I actually know exactly where those apartments are. Kind of looking through real quickly. Nice little business district. Again, I'm not working the controls too aggressively here, just a teeny tiny tap. You can actually look at the controller down there at how little action it actually takes in order to guide this thing where you want it to go. Yep, that's the mall, right there on the right. Ooh, the parking's not too bad today. Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Okay, we actually got to start thinking about landing this thing already. Now, the pattern altitude at Hartford Airport is actually 1,032 feet. That sounds like kind of an odd pattern altitude, but it actually makes a whole lot of sense because of the fact that it's only 32 feet above sea level. Now, in the real world, they actually built a giant dike all the way around the airport itself in order to prevent it from getting flooded for obvious reasons because there's a river directly next to it. And the interesting thing with the actual airport as well is they actually had a sister airport, which for a lot of people, if you ask the old timers in the area, how was this airport as opposed to this airport? They will always tell you things like, well, Rensselaer was really the better airport. But of course, at Rensselaer now we have a huge field as well as a gigantic factory. You know, Pratt & Whitney is in Connecticut as well, so that's one of the big places. Of course, it's all UT now, so that's changed quite a bit. All right. This would definitely not be an aircraft that I'd want to do anything too long distance with. Again, I have no global positioning system anywhere on here. Looking down, I don't even have radio navigational aids on this. Of course, in the flight simulator, you could always bring up the VFR map if you kind of get lost. But the fact of the matter is, if you're going to be flying this aircraft, you've got to learn how to dead reckon, and you've got to learn how to use pilotage. Oh man, look at that traffic. That's not too bad. I mean, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning, so that's about average for a Sunday. All right, there's lovely Hartford, Connecticut, straight on the right. That also means our destination is straight on the left. Again, for pilotage, I just picked an object that I can easily recognize, and I'm just kind of following along. Now, in the real world, the rivers work great as long as you can safely identify the river, and obviously roads work great as long as you can safely identify the road. Usually the visibility is not nearly this good, at least at this time of year, so you don't really get the benefit of being able to kind of fly offset. You end up flying basically right over the top of it. All right, there's our destination up ahead. Okay, let's go ahead and take the ATIS and take a quick listen. I'm actually going to disable that. Yeah, that's fine. Okie doke. There it is, right there. So for this particular aircraft, landing is an interesting experience because of the tail dragging situation. Whenever you're flying a tail dragger, you always have to think about, do I want to do what I call a slow landing, which is a 3-point landing, or do you want to do what I call a quick landing, which is a 2-point landing? The difference really is how many wheels you're going to hit on the ground at the same time. Some people prefer the 2-point landing because you get to come in at a higher speed and you have much better visibility. Remember what I was saying about Rensselaer a minute ago? You could see it very clearly where it once was, and you can actually see where the stadium is also. Okay, so anyway, what I was saying. So basically what's going to happen here is when we go to land this plane, we're going to either choose between, like I said, the 3-point configuration, where we try to hit all 3 points of the plane at once, or the 2-point, where we're going to land the front 2 wheels, gently slow down, and then let the rest of the plane start to come down. All right, let's go ahead and start our descent. I think we can see the runway very clearly up ahead. Again, about 500 feet per minute is a pretty comfortable descent in any aircraft. The safest way to do it in this one is you just back the throttle up a little bit and the plane immediately slows down and starts to sink on you. One thing you don't want to do is kill the throttle, because in the real world, of course, you can end up doing all sorts of fun stuff to the engine. Also note that if you have any vacuum-powered gauges on here, of which we do, with the moment you kill the power like this, several of those would fail. Actually, I take it back. I don't see any vacuum-powered gauges. I got ahead of myself. Okay. So let's go ahead and review real quickly. We need to make sure the aircraft is ready to go. We'll go ahead and flick on the landing light. Getting a little slow. Like I said, about 1,032 is the magic altitude here. I'm going to do a modified left base here. You literally don't have to do anything with the flaps on this thing until you're ready to slow down. This sort of reminds me of, I'm not going to lie, a model airplane where you could essentially just cut the throttle and the thing goes, and just slows down to nothing like instantaneously. But again, we're not a model airplane. We're a very expensive craft here. It's a precision instrument. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, do my little left base here. And then I'll go ahead and swing around to landing. I'm going to opt for the 3-point landing today. So our landing approach speed is going to be right around 80 kilometers per hour, full flaps. Looking out the window here. We're a little high, but that's fine. Back my throttle down just a teeny tiny bit. Now remember, we could land in the threshold warning area of that airport. This aircraft is so sensitive. Basically, I'm just killing a little bit of speed. Looks pretty good. Just looking out the window real quickly. That looks pretty good. Thank you, Route 84. You've been wonderful. I love the fact that I don't have to deal with your traffic. I can just go ahead and fly the airplane right over the top of it. There's Route 5 right on my left as well. That's that other major one. Not a bad place to be navigating to. All right, we're nice and high. Don't put your flaps down until you get less than 110. 110. Put the flaps all the way down. Okay, so now we're going to get ourselves into our landing speed. I highly recommend, if you have a button on your joystick, to go ahead and pop your head up higher. The other method I really like to do is to press the space bar to kind of shift yourself upwards to make it a little easier to land. We're currently coming in at about 85 kilometers an hour. We actually need to get down to 80. There's 80. So I'm going to give myself just a little bit of throttle. In the real world, the moment you do that, the plane would go like this because of the new torque introduced, but we don't see that quite as bad. Okay, so when you're landing this aircraft, if you do have a VASI or PAPI, remember you're going to be landing slightly low of the normal glide slope, because again, this aircraft doesn't take a lot of room. For me, what I usually do is I try to put the nose of the plane just a teeny tiny bit over where the numbers are. Like you can see right now, you can see the big old number 20 right there. I kind of leave it in that position and then just play with the throttle all the way down until it puts me in the right position. When we go to land this plane, basically what we're going to do is get close to the ground, reduce the throttle to 0, hold the nose up, and then using our rudder, keep ourselves nice and centered with the center line. We don't want to do anything too crazy. Now, one thing we do want to avoid, though, is jamming on the brakes. Don't do that. If you do that, you will do a faceplant with a very expensive airplane. All right, there's runway 20. Again, like I said, we could land on the threshold if we wanted, even though we're not supposed to. It's literally a little room. So again, I'm looking at that 20 and where it sits on my dashboard. If you start seeing the 20 disappear, just give yourself a little bit of extra throttle. If you start seeing it get too bright, you're probably getting too high. All right, going for the 3-point. So we're about that far off the ground. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the throttle to 0. Now we're just going to hold the nose off the ground, lift up, and you're waiting for the bump. And there we are. Nice. Go ahead and gently hold the brake. Don't go on the brake, or otherwise you'll do one of those. And just use your feet to go ahead and center yourself, just like that. Delightful. That was excellent. All right, so now we'll go ahead and taxi the aircraft in. Now, when you're taxiing a tail dragger and wind, by the way, highly recommend you put the controls in the direction of the wind. It'll make it much safer for you. You're less likely to flip. Generally, what you're going to do with these planes is you're going to be using your brakes. Again, I press my right brake to shift it to the right. I press my left brake to shift it to the left. But in this case, the way that Flight Simulator has it set up is you can get away with using rudder pedals to do so. I'm off the runway. Don't forget to shut your landing light off, by the way.
On ONE 21.6.
Get out of my way! Yes, this is as high as you can sit. Some of you might say, why don't you do this? You can. Alright, there's a big old fuel truck. I'm about to cut somebody off, I think. Go find ourselves a nice parking space. Man, there's a lot of traffic here today. It's looking pretty good. Go ahead and zip over on that side real quickly. Uh-oh. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Whoa! I wish this thing had a horn. Alright, this looks like a pretty good spot. Make sure everything's all nice and cleaned up. Easy way to stop this aircraft, of course, is if you grab the key and shut it off. No, that won't shut your aircraft off. That doesn't work that way. First thing what you're going to want to do to shut this thing down is you're going to want to come over here. He's coming over here to yell at me. No, no ramp inspection, no ramp inspection. So I'm going to shut the avionics off first. Normally in the real world, you simply shut the fuel off, which unfortunately we don't have a button to do that here. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to simply click these two switches to the off position. You can see the engine shuts off. Click the key to the right, and now we've successfully completed our flight. Hopefully this video is helpful as far as doing this thing. Again, critical speeds you're looking for if you need a review. During takeoff, if you're using 1 notch of flaps, you're looking at 71 kilometers an hour. If you're using 2 notches of flaps, you're looking at 66 kilometers per hour. Remember, once you do get airborne, that if you're using both notches of flaps, you're going to end up flying really, really steeply, which will get you over obstacles, but you accidentally run the risk of overheating the engine in doing so. So you want to make sure you get that back to that first notch of flaps, and then your normal best rate of climb is going to be 109 kilometers an hour. Your best rate of climb if you're at low altitude with 1 notch of flaps is going to be 112. Our approach speed, in case you missed it, is going to be 85 kilometers per hour if you'd like to do a 2-point landing. That's again landing on the front 2 wheels and then gently bringing the back down. Or 80 kilometers an hour, which is going to go ahead and get you that nice 3-point landing. Mine was a little bit bouncy, but I'm a little rusty with tail draggers myself. Overall, this is a really cool plane. If you're looking for something that's a little bit more traditional, a little bit slower paced, this is definitely going to be a solid choice for you. Generally for me, I don't get as much use out of a plane like this because it's just a little bit too slow. And although the avionics do a good job of getting you there, they're not exactly what I would consider sophisticated if you need to do anything of any precision. Enjoy.